Sounds good.
Hello and welcome to Indiepocalypse Radio. You're somewhere between a post-con hangout and a interview show. It's what this is. I'm Andrew, the host of that aforementioned show and the editor and all around for Indiepocalypse. We've got a solo show low today, as we do sometimes because I go, oops, I thought it's good I checked. I didn't check beforehand. I thought, oh, this one's fully booked, but it's not. There was like 2 weeks from now, but that's all good because who cares really? It's a thing that I made up. You can have one person, you can have 7 people. It all works out the same. It's all the convos to be had. And speaking of the convos to be had, the convo we're going to have now with our guest, who you may know from, was it the last one or the last? No, when I'm like bad at like the last one. It's like 55. The
Yep.
next, not the most recent, but the next to most recent issue of Indiepocalypse with Galactic Food Truck Simulator 29.99. It's Will. Will, how are you doing today?
Yeah. No, today is an excellent day.
Oh,
Today
perfect.
today I'm feeling fit and fresh.
Yes.
Yeah, no, this is actually a really good time to talk. We're in the middle of transitioning between two large projects, so yeah, I'm excited and I'm happy to be here.
And speaking of large projects, let's get right to that aforementioned project. If people are unfamiliar, what is Galactic Food Truck Simulator 29.99?
All right. So we'll do the quick 60
Yes.
pitch. ZZT is game creation system from 1991. Galactic Food Truck Simulator is basically a restaurant sim or like a tycoon sim. It is my 76th game for the platform.
Yes, you're. What's the word? Prolific. ZZT.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep, it's the long time as well. I've been making them since 1993, so I've had some time to space a little bit of it out.
yeah, yeah. That's you don't have to worry about making 76 games that you didn't start yesterday. These are not 76 Unity projects. Uh, it's you're
So
you're
I'm told that Hotline Miami was Cactus's 200 and something game maker game.
yeah.
So
People like, if we can get into side roads for a moment, people forget like that very few people that they know about that hit it big. Like that was their very first project. Like I think how many years was I playing Cactus Arcade before Hotline Miami came out.
yeah,
Like
exactly. A lot of us knew who he was. A lot of us knew him personally. Uh, especially in the indie game scene.
right.
And so when he became this quote unquote overnight success, there were a lot of
Yes.
us who had been following him for 10 years.
Right.
That 10-year prep to become the overnight success.
This is a
It
classic
sounds
of
funny.
best new artist for someone on their fifth album or whatever.
Hmm.
It's like, oh no,
Yeah, definitely.
they've been doing it for years, but um, people don't see the years usually.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was sort of wondering why that was. Um, so we think about somebody, and we really have to go pretty far back, I think, to find an example of this.
Yeah.
But, you know, um, the classic example is Michelangelo making the Pieta at 13. Like, for somebody to come straight out of the gate with something truly remarkable, and why it's so difficult to find that in the modern times. Is it really just due to complexity, or is there something else involved there? What that did is that ended up drawing me toward this fellow named Christopher Alexander. I'm currently reading two of his books.
Yeah.
One's called The Timeless Way of Building, the other one A Pattern Language, where the people who were gifted that or were natively born in a language of patterns, were able to speak it natively quite young. And a lot of us growing up didn't have that, and so we've had to rebuild language over these many, many iterations. And so this is where the people who do a lot of game jams, people like Dan Mullins, who
Yeah.
made all of those jam games before Inscription, etc. That language takes time to rebuild, because we weren't really fed it directly in the way that some of the great creators of the past were.
Right, and there is you get this sort of mentality almost that people want to skip also that in the process of it because they want to see like, oh, what's the they want to see the successful version,
Yeah.
or like, oh yeah, I got to make my first game when it's really the people you're comparing to yourself. It is, like you said, it's their 201st game that you're seeing. And you want,
Yeah, and people who say, people who ask the question, how do I get started making games, are sort of asking the question, how do I learn to start speaking German?
right.
And the answer is, you're not going to get it out of a book. You're not going to follow a formula. What you have to do is be unembarrassed to talk to native speakers of German and be unafraid to make a fool of yourself, and find people who are both informed and generous in their criticism to be able to build you up rather than tear you down, when you do make those first attempts.
Yeah. Right.
That's sort of a difficult combination of things, but like a lot of it has to do with that support system and that ability to talk to a native speaker.
Yeah, right there. There is so much like history of game development,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's where I run into. There's too much like, I feel like maybe we're moving from it a little bit more, but there is like. The hobbyist space in game dev, I mean, it's thriving in terms of people making it, but in terms of like, oh, this is a space you should be like aware of, it feels less like it's kind of getting crept away by what is considered to be, a lot of it is because we just call them all indie, so people think of indie, which
That's certainly part of it. It's also due to what I think is, maybe the most detrimental thing for any artistic scene, which is this, perceptual flattening.
right,
In the algorithm, certainly people blame the algorithm, but this is definitely pre-algorithmic, and you can see this in other hobbyist scenes, for example, or like semi-pro scenes. Um, there is this really beautiful piece of history, which is now unfortunately not available to the public, but it was at the Seattle Experience Museum there in downtown Seattle. Just a little, probably 7 by 15 piece of white vinyl on which all of these bands sketched their names in Sharpie and then drew lines between them and the bands that taught them
yeah,
the ropes, the people who lent them studio time, who gave generously of their wisdom and who contributed to their tracks. And that kind of thriving, really alive and soulful scene, the hobbyist space absolutely had. If you look back, for example, to TIG Source in
yes,
maybe the 2000s, mid 2000s, that was a living space. Like the people who were there were part of a truly thriving community and language. And what happened, I think, both Seattle post 1996 and also sort of post, I would say, Notch signing the deal with Lego, so maybe 2010,
yeah,
for the indie hobbyist scene, is all of a sudden to get noticed online, you really had to have a clearly identifiable, hook, or a clearly identifiable, um, trope into which your game fell.
yeah,
Not necessarily because that's how the algorithm did, but because it was so difficult for people to hook into what they really enjoyed and what they wanted. Um, I think, maybe the one thing that algorithm did do is it killed the role of curators, people
yes,
who we could trust to be critics. And of course, that's where you come in, I guess. And this is where those kinds of spaces come back in to
yeah.
hopefully prop up some of that hobbyist scene.
But that's also where like a lot is like, I think a lot about like this is the flattening of moving towards like singular like TIG source is very specialized, but if you move everyone from TIG source to Twitter, even if everyone is technically all still there, like Twitter doesn't operate the same way. Twitter is there for everybody, So
Correct.
it doesn't like this. So yeah, go ahead.
Were you part of the business call? Do you know what I'm talking about? There was this
No.
like huge Skype call. So the Skype call went on for literally years, and it had everybody from the old game scene. So it had Derek Yu and Adam Saltzman and Becca and Brandon McCartan and Kyle Pulver. It had literally everybody from the indie scene all in this extremely long running Skype call, basically until Skype shut down.
Yeah.
Just talking about the business contracts that they were receiving from the big three as they were trying to negotiate to get their games onto, you know, Nintendo DS or PSP or PS2, PS3. Xbox, etc. Like basically, they were just sharing the contract details with each other, but in the just to try and basically negotiate for better conditions, almost this union without a union
Right.
that indies had in order to just try and survive and to try and make a living. But what was great about that space was that it was also a place where all of these people with all of that experience were just perfectly willing to be upfront and generous and truthful about the realities of their work
Yeah.
system. This is how, for example, Kyle Gabler, who made World of Goo, like they never once worked outside of a Starbucks. Like that entire game was coded in a Starbucks on laptops because it was just the life situation that they were in. The two Kyles facilitated that, and this is they sort of documented their journey in that Skype call, and we all sort of got to follow it to see how it bloomed into something, turned into one of the first real successes that culture produced.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because there was these. It was like you talk about getting on like the DS and the PSP. It was a very different space, back then. Like
Yeah.
it still felt it was not exactly as difficult, but not dissimilar to like getting your thing, like the classical publishing model of, there is no way for me to get into this space without a publisher, of like, I can't
Yeah.
just put my game in a store without having to go through a publisher. And
Yeah, exactly. And then of course when it does happen, it was so strange and validating, but it also sort of felt a little bit sad and empty. Like you really felt just how steep the hill it was that you had to climb. So
right.
there's a video of me back in 2010 in a GameStop where Snapshot is running in a kiosk. And I'm there, and I'm like playing my game in a GameStop, and it's not out yet, and just looking around me and seeing, oh, this is one game, and there are 9,000 games, within visual sight of me.
Yeah. Right.
We're now entering this space. This space was not designed for us. This space is designed to be as unwelcoming to us as possible.
Right. It's a weird problem I feel games have had is like they're all one thing,
Yeah.
Too much of it like everything just goes into the same bucket and it creates like a very awkward bucket, because
Yeah, true.
because these things don't like there's a clearer difference to just like a casual observer between like a self-funded solo small team game versus like a multi-million-dollar project, but they mostly live within the same space, and people still have like extreme sort of hang-ups more so in games over that kind of like, I think like the emergence of PS1 as they call it is helping people, I think, in a weird way of kind of separating people from this kind of endless grind towards like more sweat beads on a face.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know where I'm seeing it the most, like the most, I guess, directly,
Yeah.
and it's in Roblox. So I don't know if you spend a lot of time in Roblox.
No, no, I'm aware of it. I've spoken to someone who was, I just this year I spoke to someone who was breaking out of Roblox and kind of like bringing their game, like they're basically their Roblox game out to, you know, proper video game space, I guess you would call it.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully we come up with tools and hopefully there's like some rescue. I
Yeah,
almost want to say start a rescue service to take some of these developers and sort of lift them up and out,
right.
because it does feel like you're you know if you consider there's what 110 Roblox games per Steam game, it's just really, really difficult to try and
Yeah,
find distinctiveness in that space. And yet, what I'm discovering and what I'm seeing, at least in the last 12 months, is that Roblox games with higher production value are starting to lose traction in favor of games that have little idiosyncrasies and things in them.
yeah,
Going back to Christopher Alexander, it's the difference between something which is alive and not, is this ability to both recognize that there's a necessity for repeating patterns, but that each one has to be adapted to its little space. Um, you know, fashion, the fashion show game genre in Roblox is a great example of this. There's a much higher production value. Um, and it's sort of like a two-horse race. There's one which is much older,
right.
using much older graphics. The art styles are not consistent, they're slightly off. There's weird idiosyncrasies in it. It continues to remain popular in spite of its competitors getting higher and higher production value and more polished, not just in terms of graphics, but also in terms of quality of life changes and things like that. And when I talk to my girls about it, they say, well, we like this other one. And they don't even have the language to describe it. The
Yeah,
word they use is it's more nostalgic. It's not. I mean,
right, right.
you know, that's great. You're 9, but also, they are identifying a quality there
Yes, yeah,
that is present in indie titles and can be absent from, but it can be present really anywhere. And I guess that's the point, is that having the language to express something living is not relegated to any one space. It's not relegated to any one discipline. And the only way that we're going to recapture that is if we continue to give voice to people who are willing to be, voyagers on the outside, willing to
yeah,
learn how to and relearn how to build, living things. Uh, yeah, so,
yeah.
you know,
There
uh,
are there are tons of people doing it every single day, and it's kind of like, um, it's interesting because I do feel like, and now I'm realizing in this conversation with you that maybe part of it is people having not grown up through, the idea of like nostalgia when you're 9. I was like, oh, people having not grown up through like the sheer graphical improvement or whatever like improvement of technology from generation to generation. Like, it's been kind of, relatively stagnant for these last 2 or so. Like the jump
yeah,
isn't as market anymore. So I wonder if like,
very true.
having not grown up with that, like this constant improvement, people are starting to see things that are like, they're not seeing games as like this kind of progression anymore, and they're starting to just sort of see also, uh, like they're all going to be in a big lump, in like, oh yeah, these super high fidelity games are kind of games, but also these little, Pico 8 ZZT like mini, like either actual retro consoles or fantasy retro consoles are just like another
Yeah,
look of things, kind of like
yeah,
nostalgia in Roblox.
for sure. And I think fantasy consoles, like, the one thing that Roblox can do for you and it's sort of like Gary's mod as well.
Yeah.
It's a mess in there. It's an absolute casserole
No,
inside.
like hearing people break out from that, it reminded me. I spent a lot of time playing StarCraft,
Yeah.
and it is reminding me of like tower defenses and MOBAs breaking out of StarCraft and everything.
Hmm.
And like I was like,
Yeah,
oh
it's weird that the one Warcraft 3 mod became essentially the inventor of the soccer pitch of modern like esports.
yes, right. It like defined like game development for, like arguably still is defining game development in a lot of ways.
Oh,
Uh,
certainly. I would say almost certainly.
yeah. And it's very odd, but then also it's like there's people working restrained tool sets, and that is like extreme hobbyist stuff. Like there was no Warcraft 3 marketplace, where you could sell your maps.
Yeah.
So
No,
those
there wasn't. There was a little money to be made because there were people who were willing to go in and pay for things that they wanted to see done, and it's sort of like the bounty system in speed running. There are
right,
individuals who are putting up money just because they want to see something exist that doesn't exist.
yeah,
Uh, in AOW, which eventually became both League of Legends and Dota,
yeah,
I think was one of those bounties. Essentially, it was take this map and this very rudimentary mod. Can somebody go through and make something cleaner? And I think it
right,
was like a $70 bounty. It was very small, but that $70 investment created a $7 billion industry. It was just crazy to think that uh, it requires a level of belief. Of
yeah,
course,
right,
this also it's just luck. Um,
right,
like
right,
for example, you see every 9 years or so, there is one indie that creates a brand new genre, and who
yes,
knows exactly what it's going to be. I thought it was going to be Vampire Survivors, but it turns out it's Balatro, and the genre is just take an addictive mobile game and remove the payment. Remove the payment while you keep the addiction in.
yeah,
Like I knew that was going to be something. I just didn't know which game was going to really take hold, and I don't really know what they're going to call that genre yet. But you see that there's like one breakout indie. I think probably Slay the Spire is the deck builder one.
yes.
Uh,
I would one would assume, knowing someone who has a physical Slay the Spire, so I think they're doing pretty good
oh
for
yeah,
themselves.
yeah, for sure. And they created a whole new thing. They created a whole new everything. A Cave Story was the first for sure. It created the exploratory, difficult platformer, that sort of deep platformer, Metroidvania experience that is fully inclusive. That was the
Right,
thing about Cave Story, was that it was full and it was total and it was absolutely um, self-contained in that everything that was there was very purposeful, and games that followed afterward, tons of games in that genre picked up on that and really recognized that as being one of the primary qualities there, and not just the mechanics, not just the game mechanics, but really the um, construction mechanics and the
yeah,
perceptual mechanics that made that thing work.
right. It's always like fascinating to see like at what point will either like a mixture of inspirations or either just like a new idea like birth a new subgenre, because running and jumping and we have that word Metroidvania,
Hmm.
all predate Cave Story, but these ideas kind of like certain combinations of ideas or like the presentation kind of reinvigorates. It's silly to think of like there's a lineage from like MOBAs go back to like Dynasty Warriors. Do you have MOBAs without Dynasty Warriors in a weird way?
Right, exactly.
And that's
Yeah,
like
there's different tributaries that feed into the
right,
river, and then finally the river finds its name. It finds that point at which people
right.
give
you,
give it its own personhood or its own selfhood.
do you have Dynasty Warriors without Battle Arena Toshinden? Do you have Battle Arena Toshinden without like Street Fighter? Do you have Street Fighter without Yi or Kung Fu? And do we all go back to Black Belt or something? Like, how far is the joys of, like, and I feel like I'm starting to see retro take off more conceptually.
Yeah.
People are more interested in, like, looking at older games.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm seeing that, the current craze at my daughter's middle school, at least a sort of mini craze, was Chrono Trigger.
Yeah, right.
Like, it works. It's a game that is evergreen. It is timeless.
Yeah.
And the fact that these kids grew up without any real, they have no concept of console wars whatsoever.
Yeah, right.
And two, once they see playthroughs of it and the fact that it has a decent Steam port, which is a little bit buggy and the translation isn't quite as good, but at least it's decent. It lit these kids up in a way that I did not expect. Like, it absolutely lives up to the hype, which I think is just incredible.
Right. We're getting to the point where, middle schoolers and high schoolers are getting into classic, they're like, oh, they're going through their classic rock phase or whatever. But it's games.
But it's classic games, yeah,
right.
100%.
They're playing like Chrono
true.
Trigger and, ActRaiser. And going,
yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
And part of, like, that's the thing I always worry about. But I guess, like, for better or for worse, Steam, like, whatever, even if they're slightly janky Steam releases or, the Switch, say what you will, but whatever they're calling virtual console nowadays, it puts a lot of games just up there,
Yeah.
And, like, emulation is very easy, but I think it's not as easy as people who do it assume it is,
Correct. Yeah, it is interesting to see where the barrier of entry lies. They've made it just hard enough. Just like they wanted to make renting movies.
Right.
They wanted to make renting games, for that matter. They really wanted to add regulations to make it just hard enough where the layman can't pick it up. And yeah, the girls can't figure out emulation.
Yeah. Or sometimes, after a long day of work, you don't want to sit around and, like, have to learn how to configure RetroArch or whatever,
Yes.
You just want to be able to boot up your Switch and play a game.
Yeah. I mean, there's you say RetroArch, but even, like, BSNES, like,
right,
just
yes.
downloading a ROM and dragging the one onto the other. If you haven't spent your whole life working with file systems and the GUI, like,
yeah.
Windows is completely foreign to
yes.
these girls. They learn everything by rote. They don't have any concept of what it translates to on the device. And that's fine. Like, that's not going to be the world that they inhabit. They're not going to inhabit the world that we inhabit in terms of their relationship to computers is never going to be the same as ours. And we just have to accept that and find ways to still bring them into the conversation. And that's really where it's about.
It's a very weird thing I realized in these past few years that, like, computer knowledge was not, like, did not start at a certain point. It started at one point and ended at another. And, like, there's actually, like, a small window of people, I say people, I mean broadly, of course. I'm sure there's plenty of 5-year-olds out there who understand Windows file structures. But,
yeah.
But, like, as a general
my
knowledge.
Oldest is starting to learn.
Yeah. But, like, in terms of...
yeah, it wasn't important. It wasn't necessary for her to integrate with her friend group like it was for us.
Right. That's like, we had to learn how to play, like, learn how to boot up Visual Boy or whatever. I mean, now Internet Archive, you can play tons of those things just in browser.
Yeah, true.
Like, it's just already built in there, so you don't have to worry about how to set up Visual Boy Advance to play Pokemon. You can just open up the Internet Archive and press a little play button or whatever.
And as long as you know. And it's like, you also sort of have to, be comfortable with the concept of going in and searching for that information.
Yeah.
And know that you're not going to make a mistake. And going back to pattern language, people who don't have a native understanding are always going to have anxiety around whether or not what they do now is going to cut off their opportunities for the future, and so they end up doing nothing. End up
Right.
not taking that first step.
Right.
It's
Because
like, you watch anybody who plays a game that has like a deep structure, and has like a lot of fans of it, and they just go into the game and it says like customize your character, pick some skills, and they click the skills, and chat just floods with, "Oh no, don't pick those skills!" Like, uh,
right.
unfortunately, we sort of culturally have created a natural aversion to wanting to just explore things in that natural childlike way that allows you to gain native, a native fluency.
Yeah, this is something that exists beyond games, but I think a lot of people there's more of a fear of being wrong, or I
Yeah,
guess like an expectation to be right, maybe is a better way to put it. Uh, like
yeah,
oh yeah, I understand it. I understand what's going on here. Not like you don't know like the idea of I watched a movie and I don't fully understand what happened in it. Uh,
yeah. Well, and they're right to be afraid,
right.
unfortunately, because without that native understanding, without the ability to speak the language or to build language, you can't make good decisions about whether something is living or dead, and what you're doing is, whether you're unable to make good decisions about your surroundings, without that native understanding. And so their anxiety is well founded, but that still doesn't help them
Yeah.
learn
Right.
the language.
Right, right. Because you're like, oh, I'm afraid that I'll never, um, like I'll play a wrong build or I'll miss too much side content that I didn't know because I didn't, know how to play this game properly. And
Yeah,
then maybe it's you go back 2 years later and you try it again. You're like, oh wait, I understand how this works now, or I get like that. It's like the curse of experiencing art is like you you know, 5 months later, you can go back to it and revisit it with new eyes constantly because
yeah.
we're we're constantly
And
reframing ourselves.
that is maybe the biggest barrier to getting people to learn to make games, is that they never go back. Or
Right.
they go back again and again and again to things that don't challenge them. And that's a very, very difficult habit to break. Both of those habits are very, very difficult to break. Uh, so, again, that comes back to context. It comes back to who you have in your support system, who
Yeah.
is willing to be able to work with you, to challenge you without overwhelming you and without discouraging you, or to teach you, in fact, how to deal with discouragement, because I think discouragement is a critical element in creation. I think you have to be convinced something is going to fail at some point in order to make anything of value successful.
Right.
If
Right.
you never take that risk, and if you never lose your confidence and learn to work past that, then you're never going to end up on the other side where something's finished.
Yeah, because you have to like there is that sort of self awareness to it, of I'm not sure what I'm making, but it means you're sort of thinking about what you're making. You're
Yeah.
considering it. You're and you know mentioning support groups and going back to tick source because games are a weird thing compared to other mediums where like they're like there's it's definitely not centralized in any way, you know, in any major
Yep.
city, and it's like mostly it's cordoned off in their own individual companies, so it's not, but it's also not like there's no regular performance aspect to it, where I know every week
Yeah.
we're going to go down to the theater or we're going to play a gig or I'm going to see other people. So you run to that, like, unless like the online spaces and all of those kind of got, cannibalized by social media. Um,
Hmm.
you're like, well,
Or
wait a
they're cozy webbed and they're completely insulated and refuse
right,
to accept outsiders.
right. There's like that kind of like good middle ground and plenty of those exist within like, local, there's plenty of local scenes throughout the world that have like meetups and everything, but those are still also.
Absolutely.
And I take the hour trek occasionally to go to mine, but also
Yeah.
that's an American problem, of course. Where
Also true.
where my
Uh,
sorry, go ahead.
but like we have like, opportunities for peak experience
Yeah,
that are not present in other places. So one of the things that I kept getting told over and over again when I was sort of back, we had a game in the indie bundle. It was selling really well. We had 6 digits of sales. They were like, you cannot not go to GDC. You must go to GDC, you must participate in a jam, and you must demonstrate your skill in person, or your career will die.
seems
And
yeah. Uh,
they were right.
right.
All my friends that went to GDC have careers in the indie industry today, and I went back to engineering. I went back to my day job. Um, and it's because that peak experience of collecting all of that talent all in one place, and not just talent, but everybody who has the opportunity to make something happen. All of the John Grahams, the people who can promote to 1 million people, who can fund a game for $50,000 or $75,000. Like all those people were all in the same place, and they were all demonstrating their skills over the course of like 72 hours.
Yeah.
And like you just find a group and you go and you show that you can really you really can do the work because you're physically working side by side with somebody. They can see that you have the skill. They can see that you have the dedication. And whether or not you create something successful, you at least now have the connections necessary to move on and to find the next project and the next and the next. And GDC was that for many, many years. As far as I know, post-pandemic, there isn't anything like that. Like, unfortunately, GDC, like everything else, because of the physical closeness that made it work, um, hasn't fully recovered.
Right, because
And so, yeah,
these things need like and the proliferation of online spaces, it kind of as a lot of things shifted online suddenly, for better and for worse, you don't need to go to like a large GDC type event as much
yeah,
anymore, which is good for people who work halfway across the world and couldn't afford it, uh,
true.
but
And
also
God bless Rami. Rami was flying people out to
yeah,
GDC, and Rami was creating those spaces for people because he was, and he still is fully dedicated to lifting people up.
right,
And
because there's
for
that recognition that there's that benefit that a GDC physical spaces, they kind of flatten everything in a good way that's online. Like suddenly it's easy for someone to look at someone online and be like, oh, you have no footprint here, and easy to look over them. Not in the same way that if someone was in that 72-hour jam with their like 2 Twitter followers and 0 sales on Steam or whatever, but they can still
yeah,
show what they have like in person that they always had, but that doesn't show well
right,
online.
yeah, and people who were driven out of the online spaces or who were driven out of larger spaces because they were marginalized in some way could find their voice at GDC, and it's the reason that it was able to flourish was because it had a larger pool to draw from than the online space.
Yeah,
Ironically, the online space, access to everyone, people get driven out of it all the time.
right,
I'm seeing in my cozy web spaces, I'm seeing real talents come in with great ideas, and they get shut down. Within the first couple of weeks of them arriving, somebody disagrees with them, tells them off in some way, and they vanish and they're just gone. And those kinds of marginalized voices um, actually were able to be highlighted in a positive way and in a welcoming way
right.
at these other gatherings where people were actually connecting together.
Yeah, because in your little like in your one of 30 microweb social media offshoots, someone can theoretically become like the the little king or whatever, but you can't become the little king of GDC, where you like
No.
kind of command that kind of social pressure that would force people out.
Right. Well, and also just when you meet somebody and you have that interaction and you have that body language,
Yeah.
the communication, the physical personness of that person can't be ignored. And
Yes.
so, like, it's really easy to be mean to somebody online. It's easy to say, okay, I have my principles. You said something that I think conflicts with my principles, so I'm going to tell you off. If somebody's in that context and you're having to face them and you hear what they say in context, it's so much more difficult to then say, actually, I'm going to draw the line here on what I think you've said, and I'm going to interpret what you say. You can to tell someone that to their face, and they then have the opportunity to respond in a way that they
Yeah.
don't online.
And it's much easier for someone also while you're talking to immediately backpedal on something you say when you're in person. You're like, oh, wait a minute. Now that I've spent 10 seconds thinking about that, maybe, or, to immediately admit
Yeah.
you're wrong about something. It's the benefit
Yeah.
of speaking to another person and be like, oh, actually, no. Whoops. That
Right,
like
precisely.
that like online does, and people are like wrong in little ways online constantly because they're humans, and humans are wrong in little ways constantly, or just
Yeah.
have differing
They have a
opinions.
different language, yeah. They may think the same thing, and they may have different words with which they express it.
Yeah.
And and not enough people are willing to be generous about how they interpret those communications online. And sometimes it's deliberate. So there's a game space that I'm no longer a part of, that I was a part of for quite some time. Didn't realize just how potently misogynistic it was until I actually was forced to confront that when, they had a game creator come in with a feminist take.
Right.
That was suddenly I'm faced with the ugliness of what is really latent there, and like the deliberateness of it. And once that happens, I'm out. I stand up for this person. I don't stay silent because somebody stood up to me when I was quite young and didn't really know any better.
Yeah.
And they called me out and changed my life. And I'm hoping that maybe somebody in that group had that same experience, but you can't have that experience unless you say something and you call them out. But then also, you can't continue to participate and live in a space where that's not just an unexpected byproduct, but where that was actually the point all along, and you just didn't see it until it had to
Right.
come out into the open.
Right, because right, it's one of those unspoken rules that hadn't been broken yet until you saw it get broken, and you're like, ah, wait, I didn't know this was a rule here.
Yeah, 100%. And it showed also that there wasn't a lot of scrutiny about my work, because my work also has a very strong feminist and sort of you'll see a lot, feminism, anarcho
Yeah.
communism, like very much that lilt. And if you're not really um, aware of the content of my work, it can be easy to miss that because it's very silly on the outside. I do a
Yeah.
lot of silly stuff because I think that's one of the best things about games, is that things can be funny and silly, and you can, connect all these different funny little things you see in life together. But there's definitely a foundation there of some, stuff that I really genuinely believe in, which it is interesting to see where it comes out. It's interesting to see who sort of gets it, and then who has only sort of skated along the surface.
Yeah.
But all are welcome. I take all comers.
Right, because
Uh,
games are an odd thing where you can like engage with like the systems extremely deeply, but like never the context of those systems or what those systems could mean. But you could spend like 300 hours with a game and like, oh yeah, I understand its systems fully, and not have a clue of what those systems might be trying to say. Well, because games,
yeah,
so,
and
games,
you just have to accept the validity of that.
right?
So, for example, Galactic Food Truck Simulator, uh, going through and beta testing it, getting the chance to see it. About 1,000 people watched it streamed
Yeah.
when it was on release day. That was fantastic. But there was a little early stream of the first 20% of the game or so. Um, I got to see firsthand, oh, there are people who are never going to be curious enough about this game's systems to want to engage with them at all. I have to create an experience which is just as satisfying for them somehow, or at least as satisfying for them as they are putting the effort in. There has to be some amount of entertainment they get back out of it that's equal to that. This is something that you, of course, don't see a lot of indies say. A lot of indies are like, gatekeep their games behind difficulty and say difficulty is a key element.
Right.
I went completely the opposite direction. I said, okay, let's say somebody has zero curiosity about making their gameplay better. Let's say they just are clicking at and they click enough of the game, they activate enough of the game's systems to be able to move from day one to day two. How, if that's the amount of engagement I get out of them,
Yeah.
can I get them from day 2 to day 40, to turn 40 and the completion of the game? How can I get them all the way there and give them an entertaining ride that is at least comparable to the amount of effort that they're putting in? And I completely redesigned the game around, two things that I noted from those two playtesting sessions. One of which is, if people are playing a game about a food truck and they are putting themselves mentally in the space of somebody who runs a food truck or who would sell their business or go into debt to buy a food truck, is they want to be somebody who is interacting with the public. They want to be somebody who's bringing joy. So let's make sure that we stuff the game with as many little characters and interactions that allow them to be the good guy and allow them to be the guy who's serving food and good advice and bringing joy.
Yeah.
And also make sure that no matter how badly they play the game, end of story, they will get through to the end in some way, in some fashion. Like don't give them a bad ending. Just give them what you are getting from them. At least give them as much entertainment as they're willing to put in energy.
Right. Because it's like challenge is a very weird thing that I feel comes up in games constantly, and like what does it even mean, to challenge someone? Because I think you take for granted that people know how to use a controller, or
Yeah.
a keyboard in the way that you think. My keyboard I have here must be a gamer keyboard because the W, A, S, and D are colored in red. But that's not like a natural assumption. Like it's weird to also see how that assumption translates. Like unconsciously, I was playing a game for curation, and it was like a 2D platformer, and it uses WASD to move and space to jump, which I'm like, it makes a lot of sense in terms of like a first person game. But my instinct is like, oh, why can't I use the arrow keys? Would it make more sense to have the arrow keys to move and space to jump? In my mind, they're two separate things, and like you realize people carry all these like biases with them that you can never predict, in terms of like how a game ought to play, and like what gameplay means. So you have to sort of like account for it. Yeah, you take your game to demo publicly. A lot of people, what they do is they click around constantly, or they just like are running or like jamming the keys or whatever, or like running around and like they're playing video games like you would see someone on TV play video games,
Yes.
And it's like it's a weird approach, but like, oh right, because people like don't know what it is, they want to mess around with it. They have no like they don't have or they may not have the assumed context of like a decade's worth of gameplay that you're assuming that they have.
Right. They're trying to, as quickly as possible, ascertain what concept or idea is at the heart of what it is that they're seeing.
Yes.
If you want a master class in what separates us from a million seller, go into, for example, a Slay the Spire and just mash the keyboard and click randomly. you will see that the game completely transforms and emergent tutorials happen that you did not know existed in that game. Lens flares, darkening part of the screen, lightening part of the other screen. Uh, Numbers pop up in front of the keys, in front of the cards, so that you can press a number instead of try to click. Like, all of these systems emerge to try and help and guide the player toward what is the key function of that game. It is really clear that whoever, when you see those things, you say, okay, that's why this has sold 1 million copies.
Right.
It's because they understand how to draw people toward the heart of what they have done. And it really is accessibility. Like, it's accessibility at a level that most game developers have yet to think about, and that I hope people are starting to think about. Like the arrow keys versus ASDW. That's a handedness issue. Left-handed people are going to have an easier time with arrow keys or with WASD, depending on what game you're talking about.
Right.
You want to make sure that you are accommodating and finding accessibility, not just for color blindness and not just for people who are hard of hearing or have you. You're trying to find accessibility for people who just are trying to understand the software, who are just trying to understand the context in which you're presenting your experience.
Yeah, because like the baseline, there's a baseline assumption that goes into almost any other game that doesn't work in the same way most any other medium does. Like
yeah.
There in like in novels or in movies there are like genre conventions that you may not be aware of, but like the base of it is you still pick up the book and you read the words from left to right.
Yeah,
and that's like not it's a thing that cannot be said for games, like
right,
especially as people begin to explore more and more and then intentionally want to subvert knowledge. And like subvert expectations of what people are expecting. But also it's like if you're coming into like the third subversion or whatever, to you, it's just like, I don't know how to work this in the first place if you've never played a game before. So it's always like...
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And the...
as ZZT hits a wider and wider audience...
Yeah.
And I would say I'm probably the one who is evangelizing this the most. I am deliberately pushing this game to game development communities and to communities that have no experience. The more you do that, and people are like, well, what's a good ZZT game?
Right.
The only things you can drag them to, the only things you can draw them to are games that require so much context to understand that they are practically indecipherable or fully indecipherable to 95+%. And so it's really interesting because, some people just grok it right away. They're like, okay, I get what's at the heart of this. You're pressing the arrow keys and the little guy moves around.
Right.
Other people are like, there's too many items. There's 1,500 characters on the screen. There's too many characters on the screen. I don't know which one's me. When I press the keys, I don't understand what that translates into. I don't understand. It's visually, it's very jarring. It's too bright. The colors are too contrasting and off-putting. Like, there's so many barriers to accessibility there that you can't go and say, I have this beautiful, delicate thing. I want to be able to point people to, for example, On a Distant Moon, which is one of the most incredible experiences you can have as a gamer, is to sit in front of something and be totally stunned to silence. And you see this when it was on stream. Had to, Dr. Doss, who streams EZT games 2 or 3 times a week, had this experience where we stood dumbfounded for 4 or 5 minutes at the end of a sequence which I can only describe as incomparable in gaming, inside or outside of the hobby. And like, for that to be true and to know that you cannot give people enough context to ever, it's very, very difficult to give people enough context to be able to experience that, is very saddening. And so this has been my goal for the last 3.5-4 years, is just to, what can I change about that experience to make that not no longer true, to make it possible for people to come in. Maybe the past is the past, and you can't necessarily bring people into the great classics, but can you give them some sense of why this thing was so good and is
Yeah.
so good and alive? Uh, because, you know, unlike almost anything else, unlike creating a game in Godot or Game Maker or Unity, like you just make something out of mud, you make a mess, and then you can shape that into an experience. Like you don't have to plan anything. The shortest game jams for ZZT are 30 minutes long, and you can make a complete experience in that time. Like
Ye-
multiple people stream it.
Right, right. Yeah, no, there is, and I think that's the real benefit of spreading this stuff out is like I think it won't hit with there'll be like a percentage of people it doesn't hit with, then like another percentage of people like, oh yeah, yeah, I don't think I can play this, but I can someone can help me understand it, But then like you
Yep.
hit like another smaller little group, that sweet pocket that's like, oh wait a minute, uh, what is this? How do I get into this? How can I get further into this? And that's
Yeah.
the benefit of all mediums is that like there are like having niches is like a great thing and having because
Hmm.
it's impossible to make everything. ZZT is probably not going to have a multi-million dollar like runaway huge success anytime soon. It's going to come out of
No,
ZZT,
not gonna happen.
but
It's
they're still gonna like what if any day like someone's world could be changed by a game they played in ZZT, or
yeah.
or a game they made. They decide like, oh, I want to start making things in ZZT now. I want to mess around. Like I always like, I've been telling people more and more to like think of game engines as instruments. Like
Yeah.
if you want to make an RPG, try RPG Maker. Uh, if you want to, they have their different functions. The different tools. Like you're probably not going to make your big open world MMO inspired whatever in ZZT, probably, but
Well, I might,
right,
but
right.
only
Listen,
because I'm being very stubborn about learning other stuff.
yeah, there always be people who will like, oh no, no, yeah, no. If you run this guitar through enough pedals and distortion, it can be any instrument.
Oh yeah.
Of course, I can record an entire symphony using only guitars. You just look at and then you look at your floor, and it's covered in like yards and yards of cables going to different pedals, and you're like, it's just easy. But and I think that's like the benefit to hobbyist development because you don't have to worry about like it making you money. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that money is at the root of a lot of people's anxieties. If you can just like more pleasure in just doing it for the enjoyment of it, for the sake of it.
Right.
Part
Well,
of
and I would say that it ZZT and hobbyist gaming does make money, but not in the way that people would expect.
right, right.
Uh,
There's like I
Life is overwhelming. And what's great about a project like a hobby project is that you can say, okay, rather than be obsessed with and be overwhelmed by the things that I must do, I will take the things that I must do and not do one of them, and instead do one thing I want to do. And if you do that, what you discover is that your level of overwhelm cuts in half.
yeah,
And you can do that a couple times a week, and that whole building ball, like what we would say the midlife crisis is really just a culmination of delaying that need for a decade or 2 decades and finally it coming to a head. Um, Instead, you're able to manage that by taking things and deliberately making time to do specific things that are your choice, that are fully chosen by you and directed by you. And this is um, there was this really funny tweet that made the rounds, which was you 400 developers with your solo projects could have four 100-person projects if you just get your shit together. Well, like Perhaps, but that would mean 397 of us would go insane
Right, right.
because we're already dealing with that under day to day, like making big projects work. Some of us, this is all we do. Like,
Right. And think
this is our escape.
and think of all those 397 games that now go missing, that don't
Yeah,
exist anymore for
397 missing voices, exactly.
right for this theoretical four polished, so to speak, games, and that's
Yeah,
I because I think I say this, there's people in games just have too much goddamn money. um,
yeah,
they're just like there's a baseline assumption of just too much money and funding and all that sort of stuff. Um, where it's oh yeah, why wouldn't you make a game for that is appealing to a publisher or like make a lot of money or that sort of thing. But I think give it like a decade more maybe, and I feel like the landscape is like changing to where games are having like a healthier sort of independent hobbyist sort of zine style local band vibe kind of culture to it.
certainly hope so.
There's I'm starting to see more. There have been a bunch of collectors. You're starting to see more pop up of people just like making very hobbyist sort of like just for themselves often games.
Yeah.
And there's sure one of the in the future maybe some of those games will be canalized by people who turn them into commercial products, those ideas.
Perhaps.
And yes, Return of the Dojin.
I find that that's very difficult.
Yes. I like the idea of return to the Dojin Circle. I lament that we don't quite have a word contextually that means quite the same thing as Dojin.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like, at least in my American extrapolation of the term, we just don't quite have something that carries this. Like, hobbyist has kind of a unearned stink to it sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And dev scene is close.
Yeah.
But it certainly has ebbs and it has I would say growth periods and waning periods where it effectively applies to what's happening.
Right. It's but like there's so many people who work in that space and make cool things within whatever you call that space this week.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be. I mean, my whole thing is that it's like I like the space and want more people to feel comfortable working in it, and like working like strictly for it. I think there's it's one of those things where there's a benefit to a stranger that says I like your thing, and even more benefit when that stranger gives you some money.
Yeah, it's funny. Of course, money has a certain charge to it.
Yes.
We hate that, but we can't avoid the fact that it is at least it is doing its job as being a substitute for some kind of abstract concept of value.
Right. There's never been a point in my life where if someone was like, I would like to give you some money, I would ever say no.
Right.
Maybe if you've truly reached that enlightened 1%, you can.
I had to say no. Somebody asked me if I could turn my music into NFTs.
Oh yes, well that's different. I guess I meant just give me money for nothing in return.
In 2024, this was like two days ago. I was like, 2024. I said, I'll be honest. I didn't think anybody in your position paid any money for these sorts of things. I would like it very much if you would, F off.
Yes. Well, I was looking at a panel just a little under an hour ago, Will, and I'll tell you, there was someone on that panel who was like, they're making a game engine that's like, it could tie into blockchain wallets. So it's still alive and well. In some,
I don't like to think about it, but yeah, it's a pain.
I think it's one of those things that will like never go away.
Yep.
But like the tech exists now and it'll just always persevere. It's just an annoying thing that perseveres. and
Yeah.
and there'll always be like I think there's always gonna be people as long as you throw around like tech sounding fancy words enough. There's always gonna be people you can grift some startup money from for it. You know?
Yeah. Well, drifts are funny that way.
Yeah.
Um, there's a fella. So there was a fella in Russia. So I'm not gonna say his name, but I did have a friend who, um, he ran a religious cult. It was there was a compound. It was raided by the FBI. This is a true story. He is probably in prison for life, but he funded the entire thing from a fellow in Russia who was an oligarch who wanted to pay his tithe or pay a small amount of money to as many religions as possible
Right.
in case one of them was right. And he funded almost his entire operation for close to a decade, just based entirely on this one guy's donations. Like, unfortunately, the problem with the grift is that the whales exist, and you just really only have to find one
Yes.
who's willing to listen, and that is that's never going to go away. It's just a perennial problem. It's a sort of human problem as
Right.
opposed to a problem specifically with the tech.
I remember I forget how they phrased it exactly, but the idea of you know tolerating the rich kid glomming onto your scene because they can afford to rent out the rec center. Um,
Yeah.
there's
No,
there's
it's fair enough.
there's like it is startling, always startling how much money just some people have, um, and
Also true.
and it's like
The level of expendable income. Uh, I knew a fellow who was gifted, and this was just a one-time gift on
yeah,
his 21st birthday, $30 million
right, just
in cash to do with as he would.
right,
Uh, just straight up. Like, what do you do? Like a 21-year-old receiving that amount of money,
yeah,
you can't help but just become something different. You transform. You become a different person.
yeah,
And watching his struggle against becoming that person, against becoming a materialistic person, trying to maintain that aspect of himself, which was more humble and more connected, and watching him unfortunately eventually lose. you know, um, Eventually his family dragged him back in, and he became what they wanted him to become. Like it is there's so much pressure to do that,
yeah,
uh, that you. But I watched him. He fled the country. He got a degree in nuclear physics. Like he really tried to make something of himself that was outside of what his family and those opportunities could provide. And I applaud him for it, but in the end, I don't know how I would react in that situation either. It's just a very difficult thing to do unless you're presented with it, I think.
yeah, right, because it's like you know, people, often $500 can be life changing. um,
Yeah,
Multiply that
100%.
like infinite size and sales. Like what does a human like in the totality of my family genealogy have we ever had $30 million? I think it's possible the answer is no.
Yeah, and at 21, your brain's not fully formed. It's not even close. Like,
Yeah,
it's very difficult. You know, I was a teenage runaway. I was homeless. Um, there was a time when a second meal a day was life changing.
right.
When just knowing which dumpsters threw away good food that wasn't spoiled that they would put in separate bags, and then just those little tiny little bits of knowledge, the tiniest changes in your ability to survive to the next day, to find a little bit of comfort here and there, was life changing. And then to have somebody go and say, actually, we will let you live rent free. Here, we'll pay the first 4 or 5 months rent
Yeah.
on a place you can go live. That was life changing. And then go from there to say, okay, we're actually going to pay you a real salary to go and work full time. Like every one of those steps was so transformative and really became a whole new person as a result of each of those. And now to turn around and look back and say, okay, I see who helped me along the way. I see what they were motivated by.
Right.
Can I be that kind of person? Can I then find people that I can lift up? Can I be willing to um, be humble enough to accept that my circumstances were entirely and continue to be entirely out of my control? That I'm a product of a society which has been extremely generous. Um, and unfortunately, I owe my life to privilege. Like, I had enough interactions with police as a homeless person to know that there's some aspect of my just being a privileged individual
Yeah.
by my nature that led to me even coming out of those interactions alive.
Right. Right.
To say, all right, I am, I don't deserve, I don't earn, none of this is because of me. Can I take what I do have and can I change the circumstances of the people around me? Can I make the world, just this little bit of my world, a better place?
Right. Right.
Uh,
Be that kind of like, to be that person who, that like that circumstance out of their control to another person, uh,
yeah.
because
And I do try. I do try.
right. I
I
mean,
have
that's
to
all.
be circumspect about it.
All people can really do is like try. There's you can't. We're all limited to what we can do. We only have so much time in a day, even. So much resources we all have. Whether it is just actual money or time or just the energy to help someone. It's just about like finding the the bits that you can, and just like, why not just spend a little bit of it? Why not help a little? It all
Yeah.
goes a long way in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, and it's difficult too because um, you have to find the way that will work, and you have to find the right person to whom to give. Because there's a lot of need in the world, but there's also people who, like, for example, you see people who want to create, who you see have talent,
Yeah.
and you want to support them, and you want to commission them, and you commission them, and that commission never gets finished. And it's not because they're a bad person, and it's not because you were wrong. It's because there are some creatives, and I don't know exactly how to fix this, and maybe this has been the subject of my, I would say, obsessive thoughts over the last 11 months, but like, there are people for whom there is no amount of confidence building that's enough.
Right.
Like, you can build up their confidence in as many ways and in as many permutations as you possibly can think to do. And you can try and fund them, and you can try and lift them up, and you can try and support them emotionally, and you can try to give them opportunities, and it's never enough. That confidence always gets shattered at that point when you're supposed to learn to move past confidence itself. And unfortunately, what happens is that confidence collapses, and there's never enough confidence to get them over the hump
Right. Because that's
to completion.
the unfortunate part of being a human and not like a computer is that you can put in all the quote unquote correct inputs, and then you don't necessarily like, oh, I thought I did everything right. Why did this other person not do this thing? Or why did I, even about yourself, it's like, oh, I did all these things that are supposed to be good and supposed to be the correct thing. Why did that part about my life that I want to change, why did it not change?
Yeah.
And you just kind of like, it's the complications of it all. And it's something, I find myself often in that. Is like, why do I, like, I thought I was over this years and years ago. Why does this thought keep creeping back?
Yeah.
And those sorts of things. It's the trickiness of it, and you just kind of be like, oh, we're just people. I've had even in that very specific situation, I've had one commission that's just like, I don't think will ever get done. But I'm like, whatever,
Yeah.
that's fine. People's lives change. Things come up.
Yeah, I have a fella who's into me $3,000 on. He's a horse trainer,
Yeah.
does dressage, and very talented. Lives on a horse farm. He just asked me for more money 2 or 3 days ago. Unfortunately, at this point, we're a long time into this relationship. I'm pretty sure that's not ever going to pay out, and it's not ever going to pan out. It's just, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
Uh, there's nothing I can do.
Right, right. And then you realize, oh, and well, we're all nothing in the end, and all like, oh, I guess it's this cover commission, this dressage money, all this eventually won't mean too much. And I can't.
That's fair enough.
I don't want to stress too much over it. Well, that's usually the way I find myself thinking. It's like, well,
it's a shame though, because I would say he's one of those people who, he, so dressage is about, it's about this sort of coordinated routine where a horse dances to music, and he's a musician by trade. He gave me a gig. I had a 5-year gig in a reggae band. He was the head of that band, and he was the reason that I stayed in music. He's the reason that I had a professional music career. Like, I owe him so much, and it's so difficult to know that there's no way that I can ever pay him back, because there's no amount of transforming that I can do that's going to change fundamentally who he is. Like,
right.
I cannot do for him what he did for me. That really sucks.
Yeah, that's like, it's the thing that I think, plenty of people are aware of, or I think you become aware of at a certain point where it's like you step back and think about how you yourself are like a complex person who lives 24 hours a day, and remembering that everybody else is also that person.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, right. There's like, I can nudge people here and there, but I am seeing but a small window, into this person's life. And
I guess for all the listeners out there, this is just a straight call out. I'll gladly front any amount of commission money for ZZT games if you want to try and learn how to make them, because I'd be very interested to see. And I'm just willing to. I'm into that. So
yeah. Oh no,
feel free to hit me up in the DMs.
Yes, I recommend it as someone who is also very much a person who's like, I'll give you money just to make whatever you want. You get really cool stuff out of that. I'm very excited when people like, I think, go back to the true patron model.
Yeah.
Of like, make me something.
Well, I'll take any sort of commissions, and I'm generally pretty like, I don't remember his name. He was the head of marketing for Nintendo of America. He worked with the Kirby and all them on the US side of things for a long time. But he said something to the tune of, if you want to do better work, get better clients.
Right.
And find people who are willing to challenge you, but who are also willing to give you the necessary breadth of experimentation to be able to meet those challenges.
Yeah.
That's who I want to be.
I think there's a propensity, and I understand it too. Like, people want to play it safe. They want to be like, okay, I want you to make a Balatro, make a Vampires. I want a game that's like Vampire Survivors mixed with Balatro. Can you make that for me? And then you'll make, in the assumption that they'll make $80 million or whatever. But it's always those. Right. They would never have asked for those games before someone made those games.
Right.
I've talked to people. The thing I think about when people talk about the difficulties of pitching their games to publishers, and publishers saying, it's cool, but it's not quite. We don't know if it'll do well. Don't know if it'll make money. And it's like, you think. We're sitting in an era where we have a perfect example of what's it called? Now I'm drawing a blank on the
survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias. Yes, and I'm thinking, what's that game that Maximalist game? I'm drawing a blank on. The Maximalist first-person game.
Which one? Sorry, you.
That extremely what I'm talking about. That I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on it right now. Cruelty Squad.
Okay, cool.
Like no publisher would ever accept Cruelty Squad until somebody made Cruelty Squad, and then they see it's successful.
Essentially, so having been on the receiving end of
Yeah,
pitches, I know what questions they're trying to answer, and they're often less cynical than people give them credit for. They're often actually pretty idealistic and optimistic. It's just
yeah,
the two questions that they're really trying to answer are, um, is this a thing that that wants to be made? So is this a thing that wants to exist in the world? And secondly, is this the team that can make this thing exist? Those are the two main questions that you're trying to answer with any pitch. And you do take a lot of chances. Like, people don't understand that it is so difficult to know what things are going to be successful or not.
right.
But often you can't know. So my experience comes from like the recording industry, and studio execs talk about this all the time, which is just, hey, it's our job to pick hits, and it's our job to find hits. And like, well, how do you know what's a hit? And they're like, the only thing we know about a hit is that it sells a lot of records.
Yes, right.
Like, literally, it's fully ex post facto. It's fully hindsight. Coming into it, they have no idea whether something is going to be successful or not. The only question that they're trying to answer is this a thing that feels like it is trying to be born? And are these people trying to shepherd it into existence? And I think, honestly, that's a very difficult question to answer. And you can only really, like, I don't know that a Cruelty Squad, if you try to pitch it in the abstract,
Yeah,
would be able to communicate that. Is unfortunately because it's a language that is, it's very difficult to couch in those terms. But executives pass on great material all the time. They also lose money on 4 out of 5 of their choices, but they do make up enough money on the fifth to
right.
end up justifying their existence largely. And that's not a bad hit rate when you consider that probably they're looking for that third of a percent of something which is really going to cut through. It means that they're able to amplify their impact, maybe 60-fold. We're talking optimally.
Yeah,
That's still pretty darn good, and it does speak to the ability of somebody to be a little bit more open-minded than we potentially give them credit for being. Uh, that being said, there's a lot of them that can just F off, that are playing favorites, that are supporting artists that they like because they like hanging out with them personally.
yeah,
And I'm just not, the problem is that there are so many of those out there, enough of those out there to put a bad taste in the mouth. That it doesn't really matter what the others are doing; they're gonna have a bad reputation.
yeah. That's I always think about the anecdote of, or like the kind of like half piece of advice, but not real advice, but kind of real advice of the best way to make it in Hollywood is to have your roommate make it in Hollywood.
Yeah,
And like it is nothing is more beneficial than just sort of knowing somebody.
Matthew McConaughey and Matt Damon were roommates.
Right, right. It's all these,
Yeah.
they're all those, whatever, the Wilsons and what's his face, Wes Anderson. I assume they all went to school together. They're all down in Austin or whatever together.
Yeah.
And
Some
then,
of that also is like rich kid stuff.
yes, you're
Like,
right.
all the rich kids go to all the same
Rich
stuff.
kid
They all go to
schools.
space camp. They go to the same schools. They all attend the same expensive camps. There are a group of rich kids that go to space camp every year that just know each other from
Right.
all the other stuff that they do every year.
Then they
And
meet
yeah,
they meet each other later in the Forbes office when they're all 30 under 30s, coincidentally.
yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden, we have opportunity X. Okay, well, I've watched you do such and such. I have you can be fairly confident that you can at least get this started off on the right foot. Like, you're not going to shy away from it, at least.
Right.
I know your confidence won't crack. And it's like, you go back to that, those commissions that'll never pay out. I would have loved to have known beforehand whether their confidence was the core of their being, or whether they could, in fact, proceed without confidence in themselves, and to see what that looked like.
Yeah, yeah, there is. But I'm of a weird mind space where I'd rather just have commissions try something like that and just have it not pay out, and I'd rather have always tried it. Uh,
Yeah, well, absolutely.
yeah, because like
And
that's
it's
and that's the thing of like it's the trickiness of it all. But speaking of the trickiness of it all, well, we've been going for a long time. We're approaching an hour and a half.
that's fair enough.
No, no,
So I was supposed to get interrupted at some point there, but I guess they might be caught in traffic. But
no,
I'm still alone in the house, so
I
yeah.
well, I've got other plans today, and so this is me.
I do too.
This is me starting to wrap up.
Sounds good to me.
But
Yeah, I have plans, but I have no car. Weird.
oh yeah,
Uh,
I have the opposite. I have plans, and they involve me getting into a car and going somewhere
no.
else.
Oh, tragic.
Yeah, I
Opposite
know.
of a Saturday.
I know, but it's the curse of, and I have to drive to a city too.
Oof.
But I mean, fortunately,
I'm gonna go outside and play with the geese when we're done.
no, we someone kept geese on my street for a while, I think.
Yep.
But we've got it's weird, very weird to see like the fauna change in my lifetime.
That's true.
And like, oh, like there are turkeys here now. There are rabbits everywhere now.
Hmm.
Where before they were like ultra rare sightings.
Yeah. No, it's nice. We rewilded this place, made it officially designated a natural habitat because we
Yeah.
have more than 90% coverage of native plants, and everything's back. All the old, everything that's native to Georgia. So owls and snakes and voles, and if you go back there, I got what 5.8 acres ish of forested area back there. You could just spend your whole day out there and see stuff that you just wouldn't have ever expected to be able to see.
Right.
Because we were told, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, we were told this stuff was all going to go away. It turns out it'll come back if you just if you just leave it alone.
Yeah.
And you don't let anybody mess with it. It comes back, and that's been very nice.
Right. If you don't worry about like your rigid manicured lawn or whatever,
Yeah, dude.
you realize like the ecosystem just kind of slowly rebuilds itself, and like because like oh there's bugs now, and then things eat the bugs, and things eat the things that eat the bugs, and so on
Yep.
and so forth, and they all just kind of hang out.
Yeah. 2020, we had 4 native spiders in the sort of 800 square foot area that's all pathed out. And now we have over 200.
Oh, I've got. I mean, I'm in spider country. I mean, they're not real spiders; they're very relaxed spiders. And by spider country, I mean this room I'm in has got spiders all over the place. That's because they get rid of
Listen,
the other.
if it works, it works.
They get rid of the bugs that I don't like.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
those.
All right, I will let you wrap up.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Well, this is the problem. This is why I said I have to like loudly commit that I'm going to, because otherwise
Fair
I'll
enough.
just keep talking. But before not a non-plug, anything non-promotional that you would like to say as we start to wrap this up. Anything you like? Oh, I missed getting this out. There's something I wanted to say real quick.
Oh, that's a good question. Non-promotional, no. I think we're about ready to do the plugs. I'm good with plugging now.
I forgot that I have 3 very important questions to ask you.
Yes.
1 for myself, and 2 that were asked that are part of the show now.
All right, let's hear it.
The one for myself that is my informal marketing question is, Will, how did you hear about Indiepocalypse?
That's a good question. I heard it from 2 sources.
Okay.
Both of them were already members.
Yes.
Already published in the zine. So
I
one was
can
Jeremy
I can guess
Kaufman,
one of them.
who, The other one you might not guess was also a ZZTer. He was in your episode 26. That's John Moore.
Okay,
John
yeah.
Moore is a prolific ZZTer. He didn't put a ZZT game in your zine. He put
No.
a game maker game in your zine.
Yes.
But he is known in the ZZT community as Newt, and he
Okay.
is one of the most beloved and respected pillars of that community. So I heard about you through both of them.
Yep.
Uh,
Beautiful.
and John's a personal friend of mine. We've known each other for 20 plus years.
Yeah, that's the word of mouth is the most. It's 90% word of mouth. Like my friend was in it, or I just saw it on the front page of Itch.
I hope that happens more and more.
Yes.
I love when people come in and just are. I love to see that curiosity
Yes.
rewarded with something, and this is definitely a rewarding place for people who have curiosity to be.
Yeah. No. And it benefit from on my angle. It really benefits me to have just a space where people just send me the most interesting games in the world every month.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
It's like I don't even have to think about it. And like before I started this, I think I probably had a loose awareness of what ZZT was.
Yeah.
But I did not have, that is like an era of computer gaming that is like just slightly before, like we didn't have a computer until Windows 98.
Right.
So that all like even though I think I was probably technically alive for some of that, like we did not have access to it. Before
fair enough.
before we get too sidetracked, and we do the thing of what if we just keep talking? Next question is, what's your favorite type of rock?
Oh. I love a coming tonight.
Okay.
And not for the name, but because the crystals are very interesting and worth study. And I have a friend who works exclusively with Coming Tonight. He's got a PhD in geology, and there's some very, very interesting things that are coming out of that mineral that I would love to see flourish.
I'm studying that. There's a new rock for the pile. Unfamiliar. Now I'm
But,
like a
it's a meme now because of the name.
Yes.
Very weird to see, the subject of my friend's devoted obsession, and now it's just haha, funny name.
Yes,
on the internet.
well, I'm a Cape Codder adjacent. So I have seen, I think more than once and twice in my life, a photo of the Sandwich Police, and I was like,
Yep.
I don't get it.
Right.
I'm looking for the extra joke. I'm like, oh right, that I live near a town that's called Sandwich. I guess that is kind of funny.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But it's those things you get used to. But speaking of things you get used to, I don't know if this is something you are used to or familiar with, but Will, do you have a favorite Toho character?
I don't engage. Wait, I do. The Zune, right? The creator?
Yes.
I think he is the most interesting character. The character that he plays as sort of the metafictional creator of those games.
The guy who's always seems to be having like a giant stein of beer and seems to be having a good time.
There you go.
No, yes, no, Zune, the first Zune entry, but an acceptable character, I believe, in the Toho franchise. Now we're properly wrapping up. We're wrapping it up.
Cool. Love it.
I gotta know.
No.
No wait.
Yes, please tell.
Yes. No. I was gearing up for another question, but I was like, there are no other questions. The question is, hey, if people are looking for your stuff, where could they find it?
All right. So, like I mentioned, I want to make ZZT more accessible. One of the ways that I'm doing that is I have created a modding tool called Weave. You can find that at meangirls.itch.io. That's just all one word. Weave is just a way to mod ZZT. It makes it easier to do stuff, and hopefully it'll help create a class of games that are easier for people to learn how to play and get more people into it. We're seeing that a little bit here and there. It's taking some time to get rolling, but it's also a fairly fresh piece of material.
And
it's
actually,
a fresh piece of tech.
I went to go check the questions just to pull some links and stuff. And actually,
Yes.
I got a very relevant question from an
All right.
aforementioned a certain Jeremy W. Kaufman rather,
Okay.
which
Let's
is,
hear it.
Will, how's Superweave coming? What challenges are
So, yeah,
what challenges are there in renovating Super ZZT from renovating ZZT?
so going back, I guess, to the very beginning, if we're
Yeah.
going to be very chiasmic about it, Christopher Alexander talks about patterns that are alive, things that are alive, and things that are dead. ZZT is alive. There's enough of these idiosyncrasies in it that it absolutely has a life inside it. Super ZZT is dead. Making a super weave is like trying to reanimate a corpse. Not saying it can't be done.
Yes.
I'm just saying that we're having to rebuild a lot of that language, which is present in ZZT, that has been lost as a result of the changes of context have really killed the vibe.
Yeah.
So, it's going to take a lot longer. So, Weave took a couple years to become real and become alive itself. And Super Weave is going to take longer than 2 years, and I'm not even a year into it. So, watch this space, but don't watch too close.
Yes. Now I'm wondering if I can't commission my. You're giving me something to think about. As someone who
I would
commissions,
love some help.
as someone who commissions games every single month, I might dip around to something. But that aside, and if people are looking for your individual work,
Yeah, you can find me at stale-meme.itch.io.
perfect.
Uh,
And you've got
yeah, and the current work, so this is kind of funny. Other friend of the show, John D. Moore,
Yeah.
he said, somehow I get it when I was telling him about my current project. When everything is super optimized and rationalized, the here's who you should hire to consult on your Kickstarter thing, giving away to here's the streamers you need to seduce thing, mash up the genres that play well for streamers. Instead, nah, give me something nobody wants and charge them full price.
Yes.
So my current game project is my most ambitious project. It's going to be bigger than any of my other works. It is going to be completely unstreamable. It's bans Twitch TOS. Like, you cannot play this game via stream, and I'm going to charge $70.
Well, you're
You
speaking.
heard it here first.
You're speaking my language. I have thought in the past of how can I make this better suited? Like, what streamer should I reach out to? I'm like, I don't even know. Like, this is like, and I say this as complimentary to all the games within Indiepocalypse. They are not very marketable.
Yeah, by design.
Yeah.
We're doing some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
It is stuff that is trying to be alive. I don't know that we'll ever achieve full life. Sometimes we do. But we're not all green thumbs, and we certainly are just trying to rebuild that language.
Oh, and
I see you as like the master builder of a cathedral. You're trying to teach the other carpenters and stonemasons how to learn to build the cathedral for themselves.
Yeah, one of these days I should just lie on my yearly postmortems and say that Indiepocalypse makes a lot of money so that other people might try to do it. They might go, oh my god, it makes so much money, now I'm going to try and make my own. Little do they know, it doesn't. It makes it makes so little that the government feels bad for me and gives me money every year.
I have come close to saying that my new project was actually creating a rival zine, Indiepocalypse, and just being like, we're everything you guys aren't, and creating a sort of kayfabe where we insist on you guys being the enemy. I haven't yet fully formed that into an idea, but if you see a rival appear that specifically calls you out, just know that I had nothing to do with it.
I yearn for rivals. There was when I first started doing this almost 5 years ago, I was like, I think I said there was 6 months is a good time of to not be a repeat contributor or something like that, because surely there'll be other people entering the space, so to say. No, 5 years later, still there are definitely like exciting one-off projects, but no one quite has the same, I guess, madman energy, I guess you would call it, to do it
Yeah.
constantly every month.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I appreciate your insistence on sticking to your guns, your insistence on basically impossible incongruity of ideals
Right.
that you sort of have to hold in your head at the same time. Uh, I do think it's unusual. I don't think that it is like singular. So I
No.
hope that we do see some rivals in this space
Yes.
because I
No.
think
No.
that there's room for them.
Yeah. Well, I'm building on the back of indie record labels and small press publishers. I'm just doing what they're doing. I
Yes,
my
indeed.
my contract is literally a comic anthology contract that I changed the words of to
There
say
you go.
games, or I didn't even because it
Brilliant.
says work. I changed some of the words around.
The work.
Yeah, but
Love it.
yes, indie dev split tapes. We do need indie dev split tapes. I've been thinking more about like how people, not to get too sidetracked, but I was at like a little mini unconference sort of thing. Um, and I was on like a DIY marketing panel, and only one person's advice was like, "Hey, something we do is we put links to other games that are like ours and the people we like on our website." And it's like, oh, that was the only person whose suggestion for like indie DIY marketing was cooperate with other artists.
Well, like I said, that beautiful piece of vinyl there in Seattle
Yeah.
shows that you can have a whole beautiful, thriving scene if that's all you do is just connect and give generously.
Yes. Yes.
Just have,
Like it is the ability to like stop viewing other people as resources and how to appeal to them so that you mutually benefit each other, or
yeah.
whatever, is I
Oh,
think
exactly.
something grind culture is built into people that can be maybe hard to untrain. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
We've all lost the language.
yeah,
We're just trying to rebuild it however we can.
right, right. It's
Uh,
like, yes,
and all that to say, Andrew,
yes.
it has been brilliant.
Oh,
I
it's been
hopefully
a
this is kind
pleasure.
of a beautiful friendship and or a rivalship.
Yes, I, I will theoretically make yearly pilgrimages down to Atlanta, um,
Brilliant.
because
All right, well, we'll
MomoCon is
figure out what the scene is. Yeah,
Momo.
MomoCon, DragonCon is coming.
Yeah, I've heard DragonCon, but I've also heard DragonCon's hard to get into. Uh,
I got in. At
oh,
least, well, I have it in that
yes.
my father-in-law goes in every year.
I have, MomoCon, at least the one time I went, was profitable, kind of.
Good.
So that's I think that's the benefit. I mean, profitable Indiepocalypse profitable is a weird thing because it's like I sold all these things, all these like of these 50s issues, I sold 2 or 3 here and there, so I don't have to pay those devs yet. But it's kind
Nice.
of 2 or 3 more sales of that issue, and suddenly those profits goes away. But anyway, um, Will, thank you for joining me here today. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Um, Great to have you. We're gonna go and leave the show. I'm shutting it down. Goodbye, everyone. Hey, you know what? You know what I forgot to always do? Hey, you out there? Thank you for listening. I remembered. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody.
I like to think of this show. It's fun to have. I don't know how fun to listen to it is to listen to. It's a great conversation to have. Hopefully, people do enjoy listening to it. Goodbye. Check out
Awesome.
ZZT.
See you.